on the testnav questions, you may have seen the answer to 22 already, but I'm going to go back up. So we'll go over those, and then any you want to see done by hand or in desmos. So 22 was C. You have to plot any of these 3 points, but you first have to translate the expression into an equation in order to graph that or find points from it. So once you found that and then found the points, then you just needed 3 of any of those points. 24 was D. 25 was also D. 26, you had to plot points on the grid that would make this a direct variation. So because it's a direct variation, we know that has to be a line that goes through the origin. I would start at the origin as one of your points. That would be the easiest point to start at, and then just find another point. You should not have a line there because it didn't ask you to graph a line. It just asked you to plot points. So any of those 2 points. And then 27 and 28 were both D. Are there any of those you want to see done by hand or in desmos? Which one? 27. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can put in all the points using your table. So go into the plus, go into the table, put in all your points. It was multiple choice, so you could have put in each one and saw which one did the points fall on. So my points are all these red dots, and it looks like this blue line is the one that matches that, which was D. You could have also use your quadratic curve of best fit. It did say to use your quadratic curve of best fit. So using that, you would have to know how to type it in. Mine are only 2 because I have multiple tables in this. So I'm using 2 instead of 1. But if I were to type in that regression equation, you get the same numbers as D. And this is the only one that has a correlation coefficient of 1, so it fits it the best. Other questions? So before we get into what we're doing today, some of you weren't here due to SWL last class, so I'm just reiterating that your JLabs are due on Thursday, and your 8-ball packet is also due on Thursday. Your 8-ball packet will be a summative that will be the average of all your scores. You need to get to at least a 7. If you do more than that, great. You can't do less than that, otherwise it will be averaging zeros. Questions about either of those things? Today is a last minute, I don't remember how to do this, I don't know how to do this in Desmos. Can we just review this? Whatever questions you guys want to see, do go over from the packet. We're going to go over how to do it in Desmos. If you want to see it done by hand, do those too. So you guys start looking through the packet, or if you found some already, we're going to go through whatever questions you want to go through. So that could be in order, it could be out of order, it doesn't matter. Whenever you have a question, you let me know. So look through those problems and find any questions you want to see me go over, have questions about. Looking for questions in the packet. Any you want to see me go over, have questions about, want to review. We haven't done this in a while, and I just don't remember how to start it. Whatever.
Group.
So in your packet, that should be filled out. So you're looking for the actual questions. What questions do you want to see me go over? I'm sorry, when you say, tell me which section, so it would have some number, it might have letters after it, the title, and then which number. So in A1A in translating, we're doing number 2. And then I'm just writing down each of these so that we don't repeat. So we have 5 less than the quantity of a number plus 1. So those are all of our operations. We know the 5 less than is subtracting. The quantity of should be one of your grouping symbols. You're going to have parentheses. And then we know we're going to be adding. So the 5 less than is going to go in the back. We know we're going to have parentheses of some number, some x plus 1. Translating is not something you can do in Desmos. You have to know what you're looking for, how to translate it.
1 to 10, probably 1.
That's a
2B.
A2B. So A2B number 10. If you get a question like this and you have 2 different variables, I would say just do it by hand. If you only had 1 variable, you could change it to x and put it in Desmos and see which one matches. In this one, you can use the box method. You could use double distributive, however you want to do that. I'm just going to use FOIL. Multiply 3a and 7a. So that would be 21. Add the exponents, a squared. So I can get rid of c. And then there are 4 things you need to multiply. The first, the last, so 3a times negative 2b, negative 6ab. The middle, the inner, 4b times 7a, so plus 28ab. And then the last, 4b times negative 2b, negative 8b squared. So far, we haven't eliminated anything else. It's still the first and the last are the same. Combine these like terms. And then B would be our answer there.
A to B 13.
I'm going to write that down and say something else about this. Did you have a question about this one? Sorry, yes, I looked at the minus out of this. Zach, say that again.
A to the polynomials 13.
This one you should be able to use the desmos trick. I don't think I've used it on this one, but you should be able to try this. So in desmos, type in your original problem. And then you can add in all your sliders. Change these to 2 different values. I would say just keep them positive just to make your lives easier. Doesn't matter what those 2 numbers are. And then you can start to put in your answer choices. So let's say we eliminated C, but I know it's between A, B, and C. You can start putting them in. I'm just going to skip to D since we already did that by hand. But you would type in each one. If it was multiple choice. And your decimals would match. So you could use that to check yourself for anything with multiple variables. If it wasn't multiple choice, you could still do the same thing. Type in your original, type in your answer, and see if the decimals match. Okay. Number 13 on the same page. We're going to use the desmos hack for that one. So I'm just going to change my original problem to number 13. I'm going to type that over here just because it's a lot of things. As I'm doing this, make sure you are also putting this in using the desmos hack. So if you got rid of everything, you'd have to re-add in your sliders, make them positive numbers, 2 different things, it doesn't matter what, and then start to put in your answer choices and see which one you get. So when I put in A, they happen to match, so I don't need to check any of the others because it would be A. All of these can be done by hand. Also, if you're doing them by hand, that's fine. Just double check them in decimals. Anyone want to see that one done in decimals? I'm sorry, by hand. If you were doing this one by hand, you could do one of 2 different methods, either factor out the GCF or separate it and divide it individually. For this one, I'll just separate it. don't have space to do that. And then you just divide each piece. So actually divide the numbers, subtract the exponents. So this would be 7a squared. The b's would cancel. And by that alone, I could eliminate all the answers and it would be a. And I wouldn't need to continue. But if you did, this next one would be 4ab. And then the last one would be negative 6. Other questions? Looking through the packet, find any questions, you want to see if we go over, review, how do you do this in Desmos? These are all, if your mind blanks, okay, I have a backup plan, this is how I could solve this if I don't remember how to do it. In the polynomials, and which number? 8. Okay, sorry. So on that same page, number 8. Again, you could use the slider hack, but for this one, it might be just easier to do it by hand. Multiply this entire term to each piece. So actually multiply the numbers, add the exponents. So you have 10. And from that, I can get rid of A and C. You could also start doing this by hand and say, okay, now that I've eliminated these two choices, let's put them in Desmos and see which one works. Doesn't matter. The A's would be to the 5th. B's would stay the same. So that doesn't help us figure out which answer it is. The next one would be plus 20. A to the 4th. B to the 3rd. So that would be C. Z.
Number 2, 3AB.
A3, AB, number 4. So that should be in your simplifying radicals. And you can use the same Desmos hack for all of your radicals. Go ahead and type in your original. We'll type in the answer choices and see which one matches. For your cube root, you can do one of two things. You can either go into your keyboard, go into the functions, scroll all the way to the bottom, and use the nth root. Or you can type in the letters C, B, R, T. And it transforms to a cube root. You can do the same thing with the square root. So if I were to type in that original, make sure you're doing that in Desmos. add in all your sliders, change them to something, actually it doesn't matter. For cube roots, you can make them positive or negative. Square roots, you can only make them positive. Or I should say if it has an even power, but just to avoid figuring that out, just make them positive. So I can say it's not A, the decimals don't match. Not B, the decimals don't match again. Not C, so then by default it would need to be D, and I'll just put that in to show. Now remember that this works more so if it's multiple choice, but if it's not multiple choice and you have to type in your answer, you would have to know your rules, know how to simplify it, but then you could type in your final answer and see if it matches. Did we want to see that one done by hand? Yes. Okay, so where you have space, I'm just going to break down each thing by perfect cubes. 3 goes into the exponents however many times because I don't have a whole lot of space. So I would need to think of the highest perfect cube that goes into 40. So I'm thinking of perfect cubes, that's 1, 8, so 8 goes into 40. So that would be the cube root of 8 and the cube root of 5. So 8 and 5, 8 times 5 gives me 40. 3 does not go into 2 at all, so that should stay underneath. So if you were doing it by hand, you would eliminate A and C because the A squared needs to stay underneath. And then 3 goes into 7 twice. That would be B squared with 1 left over. And C goes into 12 4 times. The cube root of 8 is 2. And everything outside of the cube root would come with the 2. So B squared, C to the 4th. And then everything underneath the radical would stay there. So times the cube root of 5A squared B. What other questions do we have? Say that one more time. What's the letter number? This one page. A3C, and you said number 5. So if it's multiple choice, use the decimals hack, but this one is just going to give you decimals. You go ahead and type this into Desmos. make sure you come out of the square root and then add the rest. If it gave you a whole number, and maybe one of your answer choices were a whole number, then you would know that it wouldn't still have a radical. But if it gives you a decimal, you have to figure out which radical would simplify to be this. So if I start putting in our answer choices, A matches. But if it was a fill in the blank to type in your response, you would have to simplify both the square root of 54 and 24, get to the bottom, and then combine like terms at the end. Did you want to see that one by hand? So square root, we're thinking the highest perfect square that goes into 54 and the highest perfect square that goes into 24. For 54, we use 9. And 9 times 6 would give us 54. For 24, we can use 4. And then the square root of 9 and the square root of 4 are whole numbers. We have 3 times the square root of 6 plus 2 times 2 times the square root of 6. So because of the radical that's left, I know it couldn't be B or C. I would multiply 2 and 2. And then add just the numbers on the outside. What other questions do you have? Make sure you're actively looking through each page to make sure you're good with every concept.
Number 17. 4C.
4C, number 15. So anything with literal equations, if you see multiple variables and you have to solve for a said variable, you're doing that by hand. Desmos won't help you with that. So in 17, we're given this equation, we have to solve this for b. So we could get rid of ax by subtracting it to the other side. And then because there are no other b's, I could divide both sides by b, just all at once instead of separately. Sorry, we're solving for b, not y. Divide by y, not b. So that b equals c minus ax all over 1. Questions there? had like a y next to it, and that would be simplified, I could divide that separately. What other questions do you have?
Use 16.
This one.
Yeah.
So for number 16, if we're trying to solve for b, we have to get rid of the 1/2 and the h. There are different ways to do this, but the easiest would probably get rid of the 1/2 by multiplying by 2 on the other side, by multiplying by the reciprocal. And then to get b by itself, divide both sides by h. You could have also divided by h first and then multiplied by 2. You would have the same answer. Other questions?
Can we do number 18?
Which one?
Number 18.
18 on the same page.
Yeah.
So 4D, number 18. So if you have a system of equations and you're asked to find the solution, you could do this by hand by substitution or elimination, or you could use the graph. So type these two into desmos. You don't need to solve the second one, you can put it in as is. You may need to zoom out. They may have also overlapped. And I may have not seen that. So because they overlap, this would be infinitely many species. You could still solve it by hand by substitution or elimination, and you would eventually get the same thing. But with your systems, to make your lives easier, I would say just use desmos. Solve it by graphing instead. What other questions do we have? 21. So A4E, number 21. So with all of your word problems, you can use desmos to solve it, but you have to know how to set up the equation. If you don't set up the equation correctly, you may solve it incorrectly or get the wrong answer. You will have a highlighter in testnav, so use it. Highlight important things if you get word problems. So in 21, we have a membership to a streaming network is $50 a year and $3 per movie rented. At the end of the year, Rayon spent $176, and we're looking for how many movies he rented. So we need some variable. All of these should have some variable because you have an equation. I'm just going to call that x. and that's going to be the number of movies. And then to set up my equation, I know at the end of the year he spent $176, so that would be his total equals 176. Because this is just 1 year, the 50 is just going to be times 1, or just 50 by itself. Since this is a total, I know I'm adding, and it's going to be $3 per movie when you see per. That usually goes with your variable, so 3x. Then you could solve the equation by hand, or you could put that equation into Desmos and find what your x value is. Zoom out, it may be a bigger number. And then wherever that line is, wherever it crosses your x-axis, that would be your answer. So 42 movies. Other questions? So A4E number 24. So in 24, Oscar bought 4 puzzles and 6 video games for $128. Devin bought 3 puzzles and 2 video games for $54.75. Find the cost of each. So when you see something that's comparing, these are 2 different things, puzzles and video games, that's going to be a system of equations. So you would need your 2 variables. You can call them whatever you want, but if you're using Desmos to check, I would just keep them x and y. So let's say x is the cost of the puzzles, of each puzzle. And y is the cost of each video game. You have 6 numbers. Each of them will be used. We have 1 that's going to be in the first sentence. 4x plus 6y equals 128. How would I set up the second one? X plus 2y equals 54.75. Put both of those into Desmos and look for where they cross. And then when you write in that answer, since we're looking for both, it'll be $7.25 for the puzzle dollars and $16.50 for the video for solving inequalities. Okay. So 5A, number 1. All of your equations and inequalities can be done in desmos. So go ahead and type number 1 into desmos. Of course, you could still do it by hand. I would say double check it in desmos if you're going to do that. So, yes. So, when you graph it in desmos, you'll get either a solid or a dashed line. Solid would be equal to, dashed would be not equal to. Wherever that point is going to be part of your inequality notation. So this is going to say x is greater than or equal to negative 4. Your interval notation, if it happened to ask, you're looking for where does it start, where does it end, and you're using infinity and square brackets and parentheses. So it starts at negative 4, it's closed with square bracket. It keeps going to the right, and you can zoom out to find that. So towards infinity. And then bracket. What other questions do you have? You could do it by hand, but you could just use that as well. For all of these. Right. 8. So did you want to do A to B, all of them? So for A8, your variation, if you get a question like this where you have to determine if it's direct, inverse, or neither, you have to either remember what the equations look like or remember what the graphs look like. So if you remember what the equations look like, then you can do that based on just the equations. If you remember what the graphs look like, then you can use desmos. But if you don't remember either, then that won't help you solve. You won't have any other way to solve this. So if you remember what the equation looks like, this is in the format of direct y equals kx. But if you didn't remember that and put it into desmos, you have to remember that your direct variation is a line that goes to the origin, and this does that. So this would be direct. For the equations, if you remember that x times y equals k is inverse, it would be inverse from that, or you can put in the equation. And you'll get this hyperbola. When you see that shape, inverse, for C, the equation, if you have some number over x, that's inverse, but you could also use look at the graph. And it makes that hyperbola shape again. So inverse. Be careful with things like D. It is a line, but it has a different line intercept that is not 0. And because of that, it is neither. The direct has to be a line that goes through the origin. If it doesn't, then it's not direct. And then with E, it doesn't look like either of the equations unless you rewrite it. So because it's dividing by 3, this would be the same thing as, that was weird, 1/3 x, and then it would look just like A. Or you could type it in and see that it's a line that goes through the origin. So that one would also be direct. Other questions? So desmos will help you if you know what you're looking for, but if you confuse the two, you will mess those up. So try to keep those two straight. Orange. Sorry, I heard 5, 8.5, and what number? So 8.5, properties of inequality, number 5. Note that the properties of equality and inequality are basically the same except for the very last one, the transitive property. So you're given some problem, and you're just asked to find what happened between whatever steps. So it says between the given and step 1. So between this and this, we distributed. That would be your distributive property. So in something like that, it would be more than likely multiple choice, and it would ask you which property would happen between the two steps and which property would best fit it. Other questions?
You start.
So commutative property of equality or equation is just changing the order. Associative is if you see parentheses and you're changing the order. And then these ones are pretty self-explanatory. Add 0, multiply by 1, add an opposite, multiply by reciprocal. All of those should be given. So inequality, they aren't listed, but they're the same thing as equality. So if you go back to that page, all of these are listed. Distributive is self-explanatory. All of your properties of inequality is just you moving it to the other side, doing the same thing on both sides. Substitution is just you're simplifying it to something you know. Combining the terms. 2 times 2 is 4. Substitution. Transitive is not used often, but it's a if-then statement. If this and this, then this. And it depends on what problem is given. Reflexive is not up there, but it's usually and symmetric. Symmetric is like x equals 5 and then flipping it, 5 equals x. Reflexive is just a equals a, 5 equals 5. Other questions? Is it
8.7.
8.7? What letter?
AB.
AB. What number?
Number 2.
Which one? Which number?
Number 2.
Number 2. 8.7 AB, number 2. So in this, it's asking you to find the domain and range, and is it a function or not? So it already gives you a graph. Desmos only helps you really organize the information, see it. If you don't remember what domain and range is, Desmos won't help you. So make sure you keep in mind what domain and range is. Domain is your x values, range is your y values. If you have a table or a mapping or ordered pairs or a graph, you're going to just list out the numbers. A graph with ordered pairs, with random ordered pairs. So curly brackets list out the numbers least to greatest with no repeats. So this will start at -3, and then -1, and then 0, and then 1. Your range, lowest to highest, y values, -2, 1, and 4. And then, is this a function? Why no? I missed 0 here. I missed that one. And I missed that in the 32. But continue.
Because it doesn't have any repeating x's.
So if it doesn't have repeating x's, then it is a function. If it did have repeating x's and they went to 2 different y values, then it's not a function. You can have repeating y values, you just can't have repeating x values. Other questions?
Number 4.
Number 4, okay. So this domain and range is going to be different because it's a continuous function. So with those, you have to think about, how do I write continuous functions? Are there arrows? Are there endpoints? So domain, left to right, this is going to keep going, it's going to keep doing this pattern. It's going to keep going up and left and up and left. So it's going to keep going forever to the left and forever to the right. So that's going to be all real numbers. Curly brackets, x such that x is an element of all real numbers. In interval notation, negative infinity to infinity. For your range, that has endpoints. It's only between two numbers. So it starts here, it ends here. It's between negative 2 and 2. So that would be negative 2 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 2. Or in interval notation, square brackets, negative 2 to 2. Is this a function? It passes the vertical line test. We're going to stop there. And then you can either keep working in this, come to me with any questions, how do you do this in Desmos, anything like that. Work on your 8-12 packet, your JLabs, testnav, anything SQL related. Come to me with any questions you have. You guys can work together.